been working in elephants since 1979, and your PhD was also on elephants. So what was your main focus on?
See, my main focus of my early research was in looking at this, the negative side largely of elephant-human interactions. Especially damage to agricultural crops by wild elephants and killing of people by wild elephants. But also the reverse process of humans killing elephants for ivory, the poaching for ivory, as well as transforming the elephant's habitat. And I was trying to study this within the framework of ecological theory. So I was trying my best to do a piece of scientific research in which the interactions between a very large mammal, a potentially destructive mammal, and humans could be studied within a scientific theoretical framework.
Okay. So when it comes to Karnataka, it has a very high population of elephants. If I may be wrong, it has, I think, the highest population of elephants. And with that, the conflicts have been increasing very high. Yesterday only I heard a case that elephant trampled a human in near Banarghatta. So, I mean, why are the conflicts happening? What are the threats to elephant habitat?
See, when you look at elephant-human conflicts, it's a complex issue, and there are several factors that play a role in escalating conflict. And this is region-specific very often it's site-specific, and so on. I'll just try to put this across to you in very simple terms, in terms of what I call the push factors and the pull factors. Okay. Now, the push factors may be that the habitat is not favorable to the elephant. So we might go and deforest the habitat. And over a period of time, the elephant loses its former home range, what we call the home range. And therefore, if a forest is converted into agricultural area, cultivation, or into settlement, the elephant will still continue to roam in these areas, and therefore the conflict perpetuates. The second factor is what I call habitat fragmentation. And as more and more forest gets cleared, for whatever reason, it could be for laying a road or a railway line, or it could be for agriculture, it could be for industrial development, it could be for mining, which is very important in some states in the country and so on. Like if you go to Jharkhand and Odisha, mining is a major factor. Then the fragmentation increases the chances that an elephant will come into contact with settlement and agriculture. So that again promotes conflict. Very often there is also what I call habitat degradation. Now, habitat degradation, let me give you an example from the south, and including from Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. There is this highly invasive plant species called Lantana camara.
Okay.
Now, this Lantana camara has been around for 200 years. It was introduced from Central America. It is a woody shrubby plant. It's not palatable to elephants or most herbivorous mammals. But about 20 years ago, it started spreading rapidly, and it formed dense thickets in the understory of our forest areas, and especially in parts of southern Karnataka and Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Now, what happens is Lantana. I think there is a climatic trigger to this. And the climatic trigger is that we had a very serious drought at the beginning of the century, and we had big forest fires. So I think a combination of this drought and the fire played a role in the spread of Lantana. Now what Lantana did was, Lantana effectively suppressed the growth of grasses. And elephants like to feed on grass. It's a very cheap source of food. The elephant is, what we call the teeth of the elephant is actually structured to deal with, to eat a lot of grasses. So grasses virtually disappeared from our forests. And this is something that forces the elephants. This is what I call the push factor. It pushes the elephants out of the forest to go and seek forage which is outside. Okay. But then you also have what I call the pull factors. And the pull factors are very, very important to understand. The first pull factor is that the crops that are being grown outside the forest areas are abundant. Elephants don't have to go and search for, wide and far for food. These plants are selected by us, for their nutritional quality, and the elephants also like that. Elephants find these crops, whether it's banana, whether it's sugarcane, it is paddy, or it is finger millet or ragi. They find this very, very palatable and tasty. And these crops provide very high levels of nutrition. They typically provide more protein, they provide more minerals like calcium and sodium and so on. This is what my early research showed. And therefore, elephants will continue to be attractive as long as there is a source of food for them, which is very palatable, tasty, and which is more nutritious. Okay, so you cannot avoid all conflict, and there will be some elephants in any given population, which when it has access to crops, it will go and raid crops, irrespective of whether they have enough food in the forest or not.
Okay.
The other interesting thing I found was with male elephants. Male elephants, they typically every year they come into something called mast, where there is a gland located between the eye and the ear. And they start secreting a fluid, indicating that they are in a state of heightened aggression. During this particular period, the male elephant becomes more aggressive towards other males. The females choose these males for mating. And to come into mast successfully, a male elephant has to be in good body condition. And good body condition is promoted by feeding on cultivated crops. Time and again, this kind of research has shown that this is the case. We also found something very interesting, and that is that the feeding on crops actually lowers the stress level in elephants,
Okay.
the physiological stress level in elephants. And therefore, the crops are actually providing a good source of nutrition. And therefore, elephants are likely to be attracted towards it. So the male elephant especially is willing to take much more risks in going and raiding the crops than the female elephants, because it is able to get good nutrition, it is able to build up its body condition, come into mast, mate more successfully, and so on. So there is that intrinsic biological factor that is operating in it. And then what these males are also doing now in Karnataka, they are forming larger and larger all male groups. So they are getting together in groups where you have an older male, you have a kind of a middle-aged male,
Okay.
and then you have a younger male. They join together. It's almost like an apprentice system. You have the professor who's the old male. You have a postdoctoral fellow who's the middle-aged male,
Okay.
and you have the students who's a very young male. So there's a process of learning that is actually happening. And one of my researchers, Dr. Nishant, has actually been studying this phenomenon very close to areas in Bangalore. So these all male groups are being formed, and they are able to go out and successfully raid crops much more.
Okay.
So it's a complex suite of factors that is actually operating. And today, you know that with better irrigation facilities, farmers are tapping groundwater. There are crops are available almost around the year. Unlike earlier times, 40, 50 years ago, crops were available only once. There would be only one harvest in a given year. Today, 2 or 3 harvests the farmers are able to take. And then there's a climatic trigger which is very, very important. When you have a big drought, elephants leave the area completely and go into a new forest area. So all these different factors are operating in promoting conflict.
So Forest Department is planning to conduct census of elephants, and they also are saying that there are at least 300 elephants outside protected areas. So can we actually estimate the number of elephants in the state, and is it going to help?
No, it will very much help, because see, when you are doing conservation planning or management of elephants, you need to know where the elephants are found. How many elephants are found, and you need to know where the conflicts are taking place. Okay, so the census is not only a means to estimate the total numbers, but also where exactly these elephants are found. In the past, the focus has been inside the forest areas or the elephant reserves. Okay, now we know that elephants are found in coffee plantations, and they are generally not counted in the past. So we need to add that to the tally. This also will provide you a database by which you know where the new emerging conflicts are likely to take place. Because you can compare the distribution of elephants or the presence of elephants today with what was recorded 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And you know that elephants are now moving out to the forest areas, they are moving into new areas, and therefore the focus has to be not only in the forest areas for managing them, but also outside the forest areas. So the exact number is not very important, but we know that elephant populations are growing in many of these areas. They are spreading the range. They are geographically now found over larger areas than what they were found earlier. So all this is going to help the department in terms of their management of the elephant population.
Okay. And in Karnataka, can you please tell me what are the major landscapes where elephants are found?
See, Karnataka, the major landscape where elephants are found is the Mysore Elephant Reserve. Now, this Mysore Elephant Reserve is a huge area. It starts south of Bangalore, in Bangalore National Park. It goes south to the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. Further south, it passes through the Madheshwaramala Hills, and then into the what we call the Biligiri Rangans. And then further west it connects up to Bandipur, Nagarhole, and essentially this is the major area which holds most of Karnataka's elephants. I would estimate that about out of approximately 6,000 plus elephants in Karnataka, at least 5,500 elephants of Karnataka are found in this given landscape.
Okay.
The rest of the 500 elephants are found in, Brahmagiris, Pushpagiri. Some elephants, about 100 elephants, are found in the Uttar Kannada district in the north, bordering Maharashtra. There are also some elephants found in the Badra Tiger Reserve. So all this will probably be about 500, 600 elephants. But about 5,500 elephants are found in the Mysore Elephant Reserve, which is in the southern part of Karnataka.
Okay. So the state government is planning a lot of highways and railway lines that are passing through elephant reserves and also to the habitats of other key predators like leopard and all. So I think the habitat fragmentation is happening that you also mentioned, and the patches are even more. It's like getting further split into smaller patches. So on that note, I mean, what do you want to say?
Yeah, what I would say is that when any linear infrastructure development takes place, it goes through a process in the government. It is first vetted at the local level by the local forest officers. Then it comes to the office of the Principal Chief Conservator of Forest, Wildlife. They vet it. Then it goes to the State Board for Wildlife. And if a protected area is involved, then it goes to the National Board for Wildlife. Then there is the Forest Appraisal Committee that comes and gives a clearance or doesn't give a clearance. Then you have the Environmental Appraisal Committee. Okay, they look at it from the environmental point of view. It goes through all these different layers. Now, typically, what happens is that so far in Karnataka, there are no major infrastructural projects like railway lines or roadways that are cutting through the elephant reserves, the major elephant reserves. There is a proposed railway line from Hubli to Ankola that will cut through the Dandeli elephant reserve. Okay, but that has only about 100 elephants or so, not more than that. So the major 5,500 elephants in southern Karnataka, Mysore Elephant Reserve, right now there are no proposals for railway lines or major roadways. Even if such a proposal were to come, today the conditions that are laid typically are that, I don't think that any long stretch of a railway line or a major highway will be allowed to go through Nagarhole or through Bandipur or through the Biligiri Rangans. These are not issues they're not issues anymore. They will be rejected by some level or the other, by one committee or the other. There might be a possibility like now elephants are going from Karnataka and Tamil Nadu into Andhra. Okay, these same elephants move back and forth. There is a proposal for a railway, for a expressway between Bangalore and Chennai. So in this case, if the forest area is small, the general recommendation will be that this will be a flyover, so that the elephant has a underpassage and the elephants can freely move, and will not this infrastructure will not kind of block the movement of elephants. In the past, the railway lines and the roadways were being constructed, without animal passages in mind. But today, animal passages are being made mandatory, and typically the authorities that execute these projects also accept the fact that extra cost will be incurred to provide adequate animal passages for the movement of elephants. But by and large, I would say that in the major forest areas, in the major elephant reserves, in the major tiger reserves, by and large, there's no major infrastructure that is actually permitted or allowed. Usually this happens in the buffer zones, or it happens when the elephants are even outside the buffer zone, in the ecologically sensitive zones of the protected areas. So the only way is to make the design of the linear infrastructure in such a manner that the adequate passages are allowed. Not only for elephant, you allow a passage for the elephant, the tiger can pass, and the leopard can pass, and bears can pass through, and all the smaller mammals can pass through. So that is the thinking today.
And so, like, how are elephants ecologically important for our landscape?
See, elephants being very large-bodied creatures, they need about 8 to 10% of their body weight each day in terms of fresh forage they eat, and therefore they make a major impact on the plants. They uproot trees. They strip the bark of trees. They bring down branches of trees when they are feeding on the trees. And very often when they do that, what happens is they are feeding on the leaves. Okay. Now those leaves, they are selecting these leaves because the leaves are very nutritious. After the elephants go away, very often I have seen smaller mammals like deer, for instance, coming and feeding on the leaves from the branches that they have broken.
Okay.
So they are providing a source of food for other mammals, which otherwise a deer will not be able to access that particular food. Then the elephants can push over trees. When they push over trees, what happens? That gaps are created. No new kind of regeneration of other kind of plants come in those gaps. And that one not only facilitates the elephant, it also facilitates other smaller mammals. Then most important, elephants are dispersers of seeds. They are fond of fruits, especially fleshy fruits. And because they range over a very large area, by the time they defecate, the seed comes out. The seed might be dispersed several kilometers away. So this is one way for the trees to get, to disperse. And then the passage of the seed through the intestinal system of the elephant means it can germinate better, and therefore they are more likely to establish a new plant successfully. So elephants are able to, that's the reason why they're called as ecosystem engineers, because they make a major impact on the vegetation, they transform the vegetation, they facilitate, the coexistence of a whole range of other smaller mammals, and so on and so forth. They disperse seeds and therefore they contribute to regeneration of a lot of fruit-bearing, fleshy fruit-bearing tree species and so on.
So the last question would be like, what are the mitigation measures for human-elephant conflict? What are the solutions? And also, if we can link these habitats like through establishment of corridors, if it is possible.
Right. Yeah. I'll first talk about the corridors. Most of the corridors in Karnataka and adjoining areas of Tamil Nadu and Kerala have been already identified. And already steps have been taken to strengthen many of these. Very often what really happens is that the corridors there are different situations with the corridors. Some of the corridors are under the control of the government. It could be the forest department or it could be the revenue department. Occasionally you may come across a situation when there is a settlement which is blocking the movement of elephants. In which case you have to negotiate with the people for purchase of land or for rehabilitation of the people outside the corridor. And very often what we have found is that when you approach people, they are happy to be rehabilitated, because when you have a corridor, the elephants are funneled through that area, and therefore they suffer very high levels of conflict.
Okay.
So they're very happy to go out of that area to another area. But we need to give them a fair package, such that we give them an attractive package by which they can go and settle somewhere else. Okay. Very often what I feel is necessary is only what I call a surgical intervention. There is a narrow passage, you need to widen it a little bit. So even a few acres of land, or 20 acres or 30 acres of land is sufficient to strengthen the corridor for elephants. And then coming to your other question about the mitigation measures. Okay. Now, but let me tell you, the corridor is not necessarily a mitigation for conflicts.
Okay.
Just because we are strengthening the corridors, we may be able to help the problem, minimize the problem at a certain places, but you're not going to necessarily eliminate conflict or solve conflict completely. Now, solving conflict again it's very site specific. In certain places, I feel that you need to have barriers, some sort of barriers, so that elephants don't get out into the larger agricultural landscape. So the type of barriers, you can electric fences, mechanical barriers. It has to be effectiveness, there has to be cost effectiveness, and so on and so forth. Then you may have to capture an elephant which killed many people. No other option. You may want to relocate it somewhere else, but very often it comes back and comes again into conflict. In which case you may have to take it into captivity. These are all calls that have to be taken by the forest department, based on expert advice and what the call that they are comfortable with. Because if you have an elephant that goes on the rampage and it kills many people over a short period of time, there may be no other option but to capture that elephant and keep it in captivity. But you may also want to relocate elephants and put a collar on the elephant and monitor the movement of the elephant. So that is the third thing is that I think we have to empower local communities. Because when you are trying to mitigate conflict, very often it's a matter of trying to scare the elephants back into the forest, and so on and so forth, or guarding the periphery of the boundary between the forest and the agricultural land. And these are best done by empowering the local communities, both through material and perhaps in terms of financial support, so that they are able to kind of keep the elephants away from their agricultural land. So it's a suite of different measures that we have to take, and there's no one solution. The solution will really depend on the context, the regional context, or the local site-specific context. And at the same time, there is no guarantee that you will have 100% success. The idea would be to try to keep human fatalities as low as possible, and agricultural damage, to minimize agricultural damage to tolerable limits, and then compensate people perhaps for loss of crops and so on and so forth. That's the best that we can do to manage the animals.
Okay, sir, that was